The small living room smelled faintly of polish and old wood. Sunlight filtered through the curtains and landed on the piano that had sat there for decades, silent now, as if holding its breath. She ran her fingers over the smooth keys, remembering the sound that once filled the room, a sound that belonged to her father. He had played every evening after work, sometimes quietly, sometimes with the joy of someone who could forget everything else for a moment. That piano had been the soundtrack of her childhood, the place where her father's laughter and patience mingled with the music. But now, at 17, she stared at it with a mix of love and frustration. Her father had passed away only a year ago. She still remembered the way he had smiled when she timidly pressed her small fingers to the keys for the first time. He had encouraged her, laughed when she made mistakes, and always believed that music was a kind of magic everyone should feel. The house felt emptier now, not just because of his absence, but because the piano had stopped singing. She tried to play sometimes, but the notes were heavy with grief, and her fingers trembled. Money had been tight ever since he passed. Bills piled up, small repairs went undone, and every day seemed like a struggle to make ends meet. She had worked part-time at a local cafe, saving whatever she could, but the pressure of the household still rested on her shoulders. One morning, while dusting around the piano, she made a decision she never thought she would. She needed to sell it. It felt like betrayal at first, like letting go of a piece of her father, but the thought of keeping it and letting it gather dust while they struggled to pay rent seemed cruel. She looked up the average price for old pianos online and saw numbers that made her heart sink. She couldn't afford to wait for someone to pay thousands for it. She set a price far below its value, $80. It seemed ridiculous, almost insulting to the piano's history, but she thought it might at least find a home with someone who wanted it. She typed out a short description, careful to mention the memories it held, hoping someone would understand that this wasn't just a piece of furniture, but a treasure with a story. The first few days passed with nothing. Messages from curious people turned out to be jokes or low offers. One person asked if she would trade it for a set of old dishes. Another wanted to see if she would deliver it 50 miles away for free. Each interaction left her more discouraged. Selling it felt like shouting into a void. The piano sat there quietly, as if judging her, waiting for someone who would truly value it. One evening, after another long day at school and work, she came home and flopped onto the couch. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow across the room. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the listing. She almost ignored it, expecting another low offer, but something about the message made her pause. It was polite, careful, and surprisingly specific. The person wanted to know when she had last tuned it, asked about its condition, and even seemed to know a little about her father's style of playing. Her heart skipped. Who would know that much about him? She stared at the screen, unsure whether to trust it. She typed back, keeping her tone neutral, asking a few questions about the buyer. The reply came almost immediately. The person seemed genuinely interested, not in a bargain, but in the piano itself. There was a curiosity in the words, a warmth that she hadn't expected from an online buyer. She felt a flicker of hope, mixed with nervousness. Could it be real? Could someone care about her father's piano the way she did? She reread the messages, trying to catch a hint of any joke or trick. There was nothing. The more they talked, the more the stranger seemed like a kind of lifeline, someone who might finally understand what the piano meant to her. Over the next few days, she arranged to meet the buyer. Her friends teased her, imagining a strange man appearing to buy an old piano for almost nothing. She laughed along, but deep down, she felt nervous. It didn't feel like a normal sale. Something about the messages had stirred a curiosity in her, a feeling that this encounter might be different from anything she had expected. The morning of the meeting, she cleaned the living room carefully, dusting every corner and polishing the piano until it shone. She checked the keys, pressing them softly, hearing the familiar notes that reminded her of her father. She practiced a short piece, just in case the buyer wanted to hear it. Her hands shook slightly, but she tried to calm herself. She wasn't ready to play for anyone yet, not fully, but she wanted to do her best. When the doorbell rang, she took a deep breath. A man stood there, taller than she expected, with a calm, confident air. He smiled politely, introducing himself, but there was something in his eyes that made her pause. It was not just the typical buyer curiosity. There was an intensity, a warmth, and an attention to detail that felt oddly familiar. She felt herself hesitating, unsure whether to invite him in. He stepped inside and looked around the room, his eyes landing on the piano immediately. There was a pause, and then he spoke, softly, almost reverently. He didn't comment on the price or try to bargain. He asked her questions about the piano's history, about her father, and about the music he played. She answered cautiously at first, but the way he listened made her feel safe, like he genuinely wanted to understand. Her nerves began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of anticipation. She realized she hadn't expected anyone to care about the story behind the piano. Most people just wanted to own something, not connect with it. But this man seemed to care, and for the first time since her father's passing, she felt a spark of joy in the thought that someone might truly understand. She decided, on impulse, to show him a small part of the piece she had practiced. Her fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain, then pressed down. The notes filled the room, soft at first, then flowing more confidently. She played a few bars, stopping when she saw the man's reaction. He wasn't just polite. He was engaged, nodding slightly, smiling in a way that made her think he had memories of a time long past. She looked at him, curious, and he leaned slightly closer, listening with genuine interest. His presence was comforting, almost magnetic. She felt a mixture of disbelief and excitement. How could someone like him care so much about her father's piano? It didn't make sense, and yet it felt real. After a few moments, she stopped playing and looked up. The man's expression was kind, and he said something that made her pause. He shared a story about his own experiences with music, how a piano had changed his life once, how a single instrument could carry memories, emotions, and dreams. She felt tears prick her eyes, recognizing the echo of her own father in his words. The conversation continued easy and natural. He asked about the piano's condition again, but this time with curiosity rather than suspicion. He asked about her father, about her life, and about the music that had once filled the house. She answered honestly, telling him the memories, the stories, and the quiet moments that made the piano special. She realized that in sharing these stories, she was connecting with someone in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. Time seemed to stretch and compress at the same time. Minutes felt like hours and hours like minutes. She found herself laughing softly at a joke he made about piano tuning, and then quietly reflecting on the stories of her father's life. There was a surreal quality to the encounter, as if the ordinary act of selling a piano had transformed into something extraordinary. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt a sense of calm and hope. The piano, once silent and heavy with grief, seemed lighter somehow. The room felt warmer, filled with the faint echo of possibility. She realized that even though she was selling the piano, its story was not ending. In fact, it might be just beginning. As the meeting drew to a close, the man thanked her sincerely for sharing the piano's story and the memories attached to it. He didn't haggle or rush. He simply acknowledged the value of what the instrument meant, not just in dollars but in the life it had touched. She felt a strange relief, a weight lifting from her shoulders. The piano had found someone who could see it as more than wood and strings, someone who could honor the love her father had put into it. After he left, she stood by the piano, her fingers brushing over the keys again. The room was quiet once more, but it no longer felt empty. Something had changed. She didn't know exactly what the future held, or how this encounter would unfold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of excitement, a quiet sense that life still held surprises, even in the most unexpected moments. She sat down and pressed a few keys, just for herself, and listened. The sound reminded her of her father, of afternoons filled with music, laughter, and stories. But now it also carried a new memory, one of hope, connection, and the strange magic that sometimes appeared when you least expected it. The piano was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a bridge to something unknown, something extraordinary waiting just around the corner. Her thoughts drifted, wondering who the man really was. She knew he wasn't just an ordinary buyer. Something about him, the way he listened, the way he spoke, made her heart race with curiosity. She felt like she had stepped into a story that was bigger than her small living room. A story that somehow connected her father, herself, and this mysterious stranger in ways she couldn't yet understand. As night fell, she closed the piano's cover and stood back. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, the kind that comes after an unexpected encounter that changes how you see the world. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. This piano, this story, and this moment would stay with her forever. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet anticipation. Something was coming. Something bigger than $80, bigger than a simple sale, bigger than anything she had imagined. The piano had spoken again, in its own silent way, and she was listening. The next morning, she woke with a strange sense of anticipation. The encounter from the day before had left her mind spinning. She kept thinking about the man, the way he had listened, the stories he had shared, and the quiet respect he had shown for the piano. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Most people only cared about objects, about money, or about how a deal could benefit them. But he had seemed genuinely interested in the life behind the instrument, in the memories that it carried. She tried to go about her day normally, getting ready for school and grabbing a quick breakfast, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the piano. The conversation, the way he had looked at the keys, and the stories he had told all felt so vivid that it was hard to focus on anything else. She kept imagining what it would be like to play again in front of someone who truly understood, someone who could hear the music the way her father had. Later, she received another message from him. She had expected silence, but the message was kind and polite, almost conversational. He asked how she was, how her day had been, and if she had played the piano since their meeting. He didn't pressure her to sell or ask again about the price. Instead, it was as if he genuinely cared about her feelings and her memories. She typed a reply, trying to sound casual, but her fingers shook slightly. She told him she had pressed a few keys, just for herself, and that the piano seemed to feel different after their meeting. She explained that it no longer felt like a heavy burden, but rather a connection to her father, alive again in some small way. She didn't mention the excitement she felt at the thought of seeing him again, partly because she wasn't sure she wanted to admit it. His reply was quick and thoughtful. He said he was glad to hear that, and he asked if she might play for him again sometime. She hesitated, her heart racing. The idea terrified her. What if she made a mistake? What if it was awkward? But at the same time, a small spark of hope flared inside her. Maybe this was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. By the end of the week, she agreed to meet him again. The arrangement was simple. He would come by in the afternoon when the house was quiet, and she could play for as long as she wanted. She spent the morning preparing, brushing dust from the piano, checking the pedals, and pressing the keys softly to make sure they were in tune. Each note felt alive, as if the piano itself was aware that someone would be listening again. When the doorbell rang, she felt her stomach tighten. She opened the door to see him standing there, smiling politely as always. There was something calm and confident in the way he moved, but also a warmth that made her feel instantly at ease. She invited him in, and he stepped into the living room, his eyes naturally drawn to the piano. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, as if he didn't want to rush her. She nodded, and for a moment, she simply sat there, hands hovering over the keys. The silence was not empty. It was filled with possibility, with the quiet hum of memories and anticipation. Then she began to play. At first, the notes were soft and hesitant, but gradually, she found her rhythm. She remembered her father's patience, the way he had encouraged her to feel the music rather than just play it. Slowly, the melody grew, carrying a mixture of sadness, love, and hope. He listened intently, leaning slightly forward, his expression soft and attentive. She noticed that he didn't interrupt or comment. He simply allowed her to fill the room with sound. She felt as though the music was speaking directly to him, carrying the weight of all the emotions she had kept hidden. For the first time in months, she felt truly heard, not with words, but with understanding. When she stopped, she looked up, her breath a little shaky. He smiled, not in a way that made her self-conscious, but in a way that made her feel proud. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "You don't just play the piano, you tell stories through it. Your father would be proud." Her eyes watered, and she swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Most people only noticed mistakes, the wrong note, or the lack of polish. But he had noticed the heart, the story, the memories that the music carried. Over the next hour, they talked about music and life. He shared stories of his own experiences, not as a teacher or critic, but as someone who had felt the power of music deeply. He spoke of the moments when a simple melody had changed his day, or when an unexpected note had reminded him of someone he loved. She listened, captivated, feeling as if she were part of a larger world of music and memory that she had never fully imagined. He asked about her father more than once, not out of curiosity for gossip, but because he seemed genuinely interested in understanding the man who had shaped her life. She told him about the evenings filled with laughter and piano keys, about the small lessons he had taught her, and about the way music had always been a bridge between them. He nodded, listening with an intensity that made her feel valued, as if her words mattered deeply. After a while, he mentioned something that caught her completely off guard. He said he had been looking for a piano like hers for a long time, not because he wanted to own it, but because he felt a connection to its story. He explained that he had once known someone very dear who had loved music in the same way, and that seeing her play reminded him of those times. Her mind raced. She had expected a sale, a transaction, maybe a polite compliment. But this was different. This was human, real, and profound. She realized that the piano was no longer just hers, or her father's. It had become a bridge between lives, between past and present. The thought both excited and terrified her. She asked him why he had sought it out, and he laughed softly, a warm sound that filled the room. "Sometimes the right instrument finds the right person," he said. "Sometimes the story matters more than the object itself." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she nodded. Somehow it felt true. Somehow it felt like fate, strange and inexplicable, had brought them together. He asked if he could try a few notes, just to feel the piano himself. She hesitated, but then realized that sharing the music was part of the connection. She moved to the side, and he sat down, his fingers brushing the keys gently. He played a few bars, not a full song, but enough to show that he respected the instrument, that he understood its soul. She watched, fascinated, feeling an odd mix of awe and comfort. When he finished, he turned to her with a smile. "It's perfect," he said. "Not because of the notes, but because of the care and love it has had. Your father left something special here, and so did you." Her throat tightened. She realized that she had been holding onto a mixture of grief and guilt for too long, thinking that selling the piano was a betrayal. But here was someone who understood that it wasn't betrayal at all. It was sharing something precious, passing it on in a way that honored its history. For the rest of the afternoon, they talked about possibilities. Not prices or sales tactics, but music, life, and the ways in which objects could carry memory. She felt a sense of wonder, as if the ordinary world around her had expanded into something extraordinary. Each story he told, each question he asked, seemed to draw the past and present together in a way she had never expected. By the time he left, the room felt transformed. The piano no longer seemed like a heavy, silent relic. It seemed alive, vibrant, and full of potential. She realized that something had shifted inside her as well. The weight of grief had lifted slightly, replaced by hope, curiosity, and a newfound belief that unexpected encounters could change everything. She closed the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing deeply. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. She walked back to the piano and pressed a few keys, softly at first, then with more confidence. The notes rang out, not just as music, but as a statement of her own strength, resilience, and connection to the past. That night, she lay in bed, thinking about the day. She thought about the man, about the way he had listened, and about the way he had seemed to understand her and her father through the music alone. She realized that she had been given a gift, a chance to see her father's legacy through someone else's eyes, to feel the piano not as a burden, but as a bridge. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of music and sunlight, of keys pressed with love and hands reaching across time. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that the piano would remain at the center of it, carrying stories, memories, and possibilities she hadn't imagined. And somewhere deep inside, she felt that her life had quietly begun to change. Something unexpected, something extraordinary, was on the horizon. She didn't know what form it would take, but she knew that the piano, and the man who had appeared so suddenly, had opened a door. She was ready, in her own quiet way, to step through it. The next meeting felt different before it even began. She had spent the morning brushing dust from the piano again, wiping the keys carefully and testing them one by one. The sound had a familiarity that brought both comfort and sadness, but she noticed something new, a sense of anticipation that didn't belong to her alone. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, only that it might change everything. When the doorbell rang, she felt her stomach tighten. She opened the door to find him there again, smiling politely as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet somehow, the quiet confidence in his eyes made her feel that the ordinary rules of life no longer applied. He stepped inside, looking at the room with the same respect and warmth as before, but she noticed a subtle difference, a kind of curiosity that seemed deeper this time. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, and she nodded, her hands instinctively hovering over the keys. She began to play, slowly at first, allowing herself to feel the notes and let the music flow naturally. He listened, leaning forward slightly, eyes fixed on her hands as they moved over the keys. There was a quiet intensity in the way he watched, as if he were not just hearing the music, but remembering something long forgotten. She felt a shiver run through her, unsure if it was from the music or the strange, almost magical presence he carried. When she stopped playing, he leaned back and exhaled softly, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "You play with heart," he said. "I can feel it in every note. Your father left something incredible here, and you've carried it forward beautifully." She blushed slightly, overwhelmed by his words. It was one thing for a teacher to praise her, or a friend to be kind, but for him to recognize something so intimate, so personal, felt extraordinary. She wondered for a moment if this was really happening, or if she had somehow imagined it. Then he did something unexpected. He moved closer to the piano, running a hand lightly over the polished wood. "Do you know," he said softly, "that I've been looking for a piano like this for a long time?" Her eyes widened. She had expected him to want to buy it or maybe ask about its price again, but this sounded different. "Why?" she asked, curious but cautious. He smiled faintly. "Because some pianos carry memories. They have a soul in a way. And when you play, it's not just sound. It's history, emotion, life. Your father's playing left something here. It's rare. It's beautiful. And I wanted to see it for myself." Her heart skipped. She had never thought of a piano as something alive, something that could hold a person's spirit. Yet here he was, treating it not like an object to own, but as a vessel of emotion, a keeper of stories. She felt both awe and disbelief, unable to fully process what was happening. He asked if she would play again, and this time she felt more confident. She let her fingers move freely, remembering her father's lessons. Don't just play, feel. Let the music speak. And as she played, she noticed something remarkable. He didn't just listen, he responded. He hummed softly along with the melody, small murmurs of appreciation that matched the rhythm. It felt as though they were speaking in a language that had existed long before words. When she finished, he looked at her with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through her, gentle but intense. "There's something I should tell you," he said quietly. She tilted her head, curious, sensing that what he was about to say would change everything. "I knew your father," he continued. "Not just casually. I knew him as a musician. We played together once many years ago. He was remarkable, a talent beyond what most people see. I never forgot the way he could make the piano sing, the way he could make a room feel alive with music. I always hoped I would play with him again, but life took its own course." Her hands froze slightly on the keys. She had known her father had played with friends and local musicians, but she had never imagined anyone famous or significant might have known him. Her mind raced, trying to connect this polite, kind stranger with the memory of her father's past. He leaned back slightly, a faint smile on his face, but his eyes held a quiet sadness. "And now, through you, I can hear a part of him again. Not fully, of course, but enough to remember. Enough to feel that spark again. That's why I wanted to see the piano. That's why I came." Tears pricked at her eyes. She had expected a sale, an ordinary transaction, maybe some polite conversation. She hadn't expected recognition, connection, or a link to her father's past in such a profound way. Her heart felt full, heavy, and light all at once. Why me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Because you play with his spirit in your fingers," he replied gently. "Not just technically, but emotionally. You tell stories through the notes. Anyone can press keys, but not everyone can make the piano speak the way your father did. And not everyone can carry that forward as you do." She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She had always felt the weight of the piano, the responsibility of her father's memory. But now, she realized that the weight was not a burden. It was a gift, a bridge between generations. Her father had left something precious, and she had kept it alive. And somehow, this stranger who knew her father understood it too. He asked if he could sit down at the piano. She moved aside, feeling a mix of awe and nervous excitement. He pressed the keys lightly, testing the instrument, and then played a short melody. It wasn't complex, but it was deliberate, respectful, full of feeling. She watched him, captivated, realizing that every note carried not just sound, but memory. When he finished, he turned to her, eyes shining with a quiet reverence. "It's perfect," he said, "not because of the notes, but because of the care it's had, the hands that have touched it, the love that has kept it alive. Your father gave it life and you've honored it. That's rare." Her fingers itched to play again, to respond to the music, to show him that she understood. She sat down, and together they created a quiet duet, each note flowing naturally from one to the other. The room filled with sound, but also with memory, connection, and emotion. Time seemed to stretch, and for a few moments the world outside the living room ceased to exist. When they finally stopped, he looked at her with a soft smile. "I have to be honest," he said. "I didn't just come here to buy a piano. I came here because I wanted to see her." He paused, then nodded toward the piano. "I wanted to see her play, to see her carry on the story. I had a feeling that if anyone could do it, it would be you." Her breath caught. She had never expected this. She had thought the piano was just an object, a way to make some money, a link to her father. But it was more than that. It was a living memory, a way for people to connect. And now, it had brought someone into her life who had known her father in a way she could only dream of. They talked for hours, not about prices or deals, but about music, memory, and life. He asked her about her father's style, about the way he had taught her, about the quiet moments she remembered. She shared stories she had never told anyone else. And he listened, fully present, not interrupting or judging, only absorbing the life behind the keys. By the time he left, the room felt transformed. The piano no longer seemed like a heavy relic of the past. It felt alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. She realized that the encounter had changed her, too. She felt a sense of purpose, of connection, and of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. After the door closed, she stood by the piano, her fingers brushing over the keys. The room was silent, but it no longer felt empty. She pressed a few notes softly, imagining the echoes of the music carrying forward, linking the past with the present. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of excitement and curiosity about the future. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind replayed the day over and over. The way he had spoken, the music they had shared, the recognition he had given to her father's memory. It all felt unreal, yet entirely real. She realized that life could hold extraordinary surprises, that ordinary moments could transform into something unforgettable. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet anticipation. She didn't know exactly what was coming, but she knew that the piano, the stories, and the man who had appeared so suddenly were part of something bigger, something that would change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that this was only the beginning. The day started like any other, but she felt a quiet thrill in the air. The encounter from the previous day lingered in her mind, like a soft melody that would not fade. The piano sat in its usual place, polished and ready, but this time it seemed different, alive, almost as if it sensed what was about to happen. She touched the keys lightly, listening to the familiar sound, feeling it vibrate through her fingertips. She spent the morning practicing a little, not because she needed to impress, but because something deep inside told her that today would be extraordinary. Her father's lessons returned in flashes, the way he had said to feel every note, to play not just with her hands, but with her heart. The memory gave her courage and a strange, steady calm. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, her heart leapt. She opened the door to see him standing there again, the same calm smile on his face. He carried himself with that quiet confidence, but there was also a sparkle in his eyes, like he already knew something wonderful was about to happen. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. She felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation that she hadn't felt in years. She led him into the living room, where the piano sat waiting like an old friend, its polished wood gleaming in the sunlight. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked at the piano with a kind of reverence. Then he turned to her. "Would you play for me?" he asked gently. "Not just a little, but your story. Let the music speak." She swallowed hard. She had played before, but never like this, never with such intensity, never with someone who truly understood what the piano meant to her. She sat down on the bench and let her hands hover over the keys, taking a deep breath. Then she began to play. At first, the notes were soft and tentative, but soon they grew stronger. She remembered her father's encouragement, his patience, the way he had made every note feel like a word in a story. She poured her feelings into the music. Grief for the months without him, love for the memories they had shared, hope for the future she could not yet see. Each note carried her emotions, her memories, her heart. He listened, leaning forward slightly, but he didn't touch the piano. He didn't offer advice or criticism. He simply listened, completely present, absorbing every sound. And as she played, something extraordinary happened. She noticed his eyes glisten, a subtle but undeniable reaction to the music. He was moved, truly moved, by what she was creating with her hands. The melody changed, flowing from quiet sadness to moments of joy, then back again, capturing the full spectrum of her emotions. It was as if the piano itself was speaking through her, telling the story of a life filled with love, loss, and resilience. She felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't stop. She let the music carry her, trusting that he would understand. When she finally paused, the room was silent for a heartbeat, and then he spoke, his voice low and filled with wonder. That was incredible," he said. "You didn't just play, you brought it to life. Your father, he would have been so proud." Her chest tightened with emotion. She had never expected this. Most people only noticed mistakes or perfection, not the heart behind the music. But he had understood. He had felt it. And that made everything, the grief, the loneliness, the struggle, worth it. He leaned closer to the piano, running a hand lightly over the polished wood. "Do you know," he said softly, "that I never thought I would hear a sound like that again? Your father had a way with the keys that stayed with me, even after all these years. And now, through you, I hear it again. She felt her hands tremble, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. She realized that the piano was not just a connection to her father, but a bridge between past and present, between her and this extraordinary man who had appeared so unexpectedly. He asked if he could try a few notes. She hesitated, then stepped aside, realizing that sharing the piano was part of the magic. He pressed the keys lightly, letting the sound resonate through the room, not as a performance, but as a conversation. She watched, captivated, feeling the weight of history and memory in every note. When he finished, he turned to her with a smile that was gentle but full of meaning. "It's perfect," he said, "not because of the music itself, but because of the life it carries, the hands that have played it, the love that surrounds it. Your father left something special here, and so did you." She felt a lump in her throat, realizing that she had been holding on to more than just the piano. She had carried grief, guilt, and the fear that she might forget her father. But in this moment, she understood that memory and love were not lost. They lived in the music, in her hands, in the piano itself. For the next hour, they played together, a quiet duet of sound and memory. She led, then he led, and sometimes they followed each other in a spontaneous rhythm. It was not a performance, not a lesson, not a show. It was a conversation, a sharing of stories without words, a connection deeper than anything she had ever experienced. She noticed small details she had never paid attention to, the warmth of the keys under her fingers, the way the pedals responded to the subtle pressure of her feet, the resonance of the sound in the room. Each note felt alive, each pause full of meaning. And as they played, she realized something extraordinary. The piano was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the music, to the memories, to the connection that had formed between them. When they finally stopped, the room was silent, filled only with the echoes of the music they had created together. She looked at him, breathless and emotional. I didn't think I could do that," she admitted. "You did more than that," he said softly. "You made the piano speak. You made it tell a story. That is rare and beautiful, and something that will stay with you forever." Her heart swelled. For so long, she had worried about selling the piano, about letting go of her father's memory. But now she realized that the piano had done its job. It had carried the story forward, connected lives, and created a moment of magic she would never forget. He stood and looked around the room, his eyes resting on the piano one last time. "I came here to see the piano," he said, "but I stayed for the music and for you. You've honored it in a way that goes beyond money or ownership. That's rare. That's precious. That's the kind of thing that doesn't happen often in life." Tears ran down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak, feeling a mix of gratitude, awe, and joy. For the first time since her father's passing, she felt truly understood, truly seen. The piano had brought her grief and memories, but now it had brought connection, magic, and hope. He asked her about her plans for the piano. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. She had thought about selling it, about letting it go, but she didn't want to part with it entirely. He smiled gently. "Sometimes, letting go doesn't mean losing. Sometimes it means sharing. And sharing is how memories live on." She realized he was right. The piano was no longer just hers, not in the way it had been before. It belonged to the music, to the stories, and to the connections that it had created. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet sense of peace and possibility. They talked for a while longer, not about money, but about life, music, and the strange ways in which ordinary objects could change everything. She told him about her father, about the evenings spent listening to him play, about the lessons he had taught her. He listened, fully present, nodding, and responding with warmth and understanding. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, he finally stood to leave. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but filled with meaning. "For the music, for the stories, and for letting me be a part of this. The piano is in good hands, and so are you." She watched him go, feeling a mixture of loss and exhilaration. The room felt quiet, but it no longer felt empty. She sat down at the piano again, letting her fingers press the keys softly, letting the music flow freely. She felt her father's presence, her own presence, and the memory of the extraordinary man who had appeared so suddenly in her life. That night, she lay in bed, thinking about the day. The music, the connection, the recognition. It all felt like a dream, yet it was entirely real. She realized that life could hold extraordinary moments, that the ordinary could transform into something unforgettable. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet excitement. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she knew that the piano, the memories, and the people it touched would continue to shape her life in ways she could never have imagined. She drifted off to sleep with a soft smile, the echoes of the piano still ringing in her mind, carrying her into dreams filled with music, love, and the possibility of something magical yet to come. The morning sunlight came softly through the curtains, painting the living room in gentle gold. She walked over to the piano, brushing her fingers over the polished wood as she had done every day since the extraordinary visit. The instrument felt alive in a way it never had before. Not just wood and strings, not just a memory of her father, but something more. An echo of all the emotions, all the music, and all the connections it had carried. The thought of the man who had come into her life kept returning to her mind. He had not only understood the piano but had understood her, her father, and the life that music had shaped. She felt gratitude deeper than words could express. It was not a simple feeling of thanks. It was a recognition that something rare and profound had happened, something that had changed the way she saw the world. She pressed a few keys gently, letting the familiar notes fill the room. The sound was different now. It was confident, warm, and full of history. Each note seemed to carry the weight of the past and the promise of the future. She realized that she had grown. In the past weeks, her grief had softened, replaced by hope and connection. The piano had not just survived her father. It had survived her own doubts, fears, and insecurities. And now it thrived. Her thoughts wandered to the moment when he had sat beside her, listening, encouraging, and letting the music flow naturally. She remembered how he had said that sharing the piano did not mean losing it. She now understood the truth of that statement. Giving space for others to feel the music, to share in the story, had not diminished the piano. It had strengthened its meaning. She picked up her phone and saw his message from the night before, simple and thoughtful. Remember, music is never truly lost. It moves through hearts, through hands, through stories. Play for yourself, and for those who will listen. She smiled, feeling the truth of it resonate inside her. Later that afternoon, she decided to play again, just for herself, in a quiet way. She began softly, letting her fingers wander across the keys, creating a melody that spoke of memory and hope. It was not a performance. It was a conversation with the piano, with her father, and with the unseen moments of life that had brought her here. The music flowed naturally, each note a thread connecting past, present, and future. As she played, she imagined the man watching and listening, not judging, not evaluating, but simply absorbing the story she told through the keys. She imagined his smile, the gentle nods of encouragement, and the quiet awe in his eyes. It gave her confidence, a gentle reminder that music, love, and memory could touch lives in ways she might never fully understand. Her parents' old photographs sat on the mantel, silent witnesses to her journey. She looked at her father's smiling face and felt a deep warmth. He had left her more than a piano. He had left her the ability to feel, to create, and to connect with others through music. Every lesson he had taught, every gentle word of encouragement, every patient correction was alive in her hands now. She realized that she had not just inherited a piano. She had inherited his spirit, his passion, and his love. Weeks passed, and the piano continued to fill the house with music. She played for herself, for neighbors who stopped by, for friends who had never understood the depth of her father's influence. Each time, she felt the connection strengthen. The piano had become a bridge between people, a keeper of stories and emotions that could not be expressed in words alone. One afternoon, the man appeared again as unexpectedly as before. She had not expected to see him so soon, but she felt no fear, only a warm familiarity. He smiled at her, and she realized how much she had grown, how much her confidence had returned, and how natural it now felt to share her music. "You've done something remarkable," he said quietly. "The piano, the music, the way you've carried your father's memory, it's extraordinary. I'm glad to see it alive in you." She felt her chest swell with pride and gratitude. "I didn't know I could do it," she admitted softly. "I didn't know I could keep it alive in this way." "You did," he said simply. "And that's the beautiful part. Music, love, memory, they move through us whether we know it or not. You've allowed it to flow freely, and that is rare." They sat together for a while, talking about life, music, and the strange ways in which ordinary objects could transform into something extraordinary. She realized that the piano had become more than a tool or a memory. It had become a symbol of resilience, hope, and connection. As he left that afternoon, she felt a quiet joy. The piano was no longer just hers, not in the old sense of possession or ownership. It belonged to life itself, to the music it carried, and to the connections it created. She understood that she would never be alone with it, never truly lost, because the piano was alive in ways she could feel and share. Days turned into weeks, and the world moved on around her. Yet every time she touched the keys, she felt a sense of magic. She played for friends who had never appreciated music, and they listened with curiosity and wonder. She played quietly at night, letting her own emotions flow freely. And sometimes, she imagined her father sitting beside her, smiling and nodding, proud of the music that continued to flow through her. One evening, she received a final message from him. "Keep playing," it read. "Let the piano speak, let the memories live, and let yourself grow. You've done more than you know, and there is still so much ahead." She smiled, feeling the weight of his words, and understood that her journey with the piano was only beginning. She spent hours at the piano that night, improvising, exploring, letting herself feel fully without restraint. Each note carried a part of her father, and a part of the stranger who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. She realized that music was more than sound. It was memory, connection, and emotion made visible through hands and heart. The next day, she allowed herself to think about the future. She could sell the piano if she wanted, but it no longer mattered in the same way. The value was not in the price, but in the music, the stories, and the lives it touched. She imagined other people hearing it someday, feeling the echoes of love and loss, hope and joy, just as she had. Her confidence grew not just as a pianist, but as a person. She realized that she could face challenges with courage, that she could honor her father while also embracing her own life, and that unexpected moments could bring magic into the most ordinary of days. She understood that the piano had been a teacher in its own right, showing her the power of patience, emotion, and sharing. Months later, she sat at the piano, playing a familiar melody that her father had taught her long ago. She smiled, remembering the laughter, the gentle corrections, and the quiet encouragement that had shaped her hands and her heart. She felt a deep peace, knowing that she had honored him in a way that mattered, not through possessions, but through music and memory. The piano continued to sing, filling the house with life and warmth. She played for herself, for others, and for the memory of her father. She knew that one day she might pass it on, and when she did, it would carry not just her father's story, but her own, and the story of the man who had appeared so unexpectedly to remind her of its magic. She realized that life was full of moments like this, quiet, extraordinary, and transformative. The piano had taught her to listen, to feel, and to connect in ways that words could not capture. It had shown her that the past and present could meet through music, that grief could transform into hope, and that unexpected encounters could change everything. Her life had been ordinary in many ways: school, work, chores. But the piano had shown her that even the simplest moments could hold profound meaning. She understood now that her father's love and guidance had never left her, and that through music, she could continue to honor him every day. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the keys felt warm under her fingers, she imagined the man watching, listening, smiling at the music that had brought them together. She imagined his presence not as something physical, but as a reminder of the extraordinary ways in which ordinary lives could intersect. The piano, once a silent, heavy reminder of loss, had become a living, breathing part of her life. She had learned to play not just for herself, but for the past, the present, and the future. She had learned that music could connect hearts, carry stories, and create magic in ways that nothing else could. And as she pressed the keys one last time that evening, letting the notes linger in the warm air of the living room, she smiled. She felt her father's presence, the echo of the stranger's words, and the quiet joy of knowing that she had carried the piano's story forward. It was hers, yet not hers. It belonged to music, memory, and life itself. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace. The piano had spoken loudly, not just to her, but to anyone willing to listen. And in its music, she found herself, her father, and the extraordinary connections that life could bring when one was open to them. The room was quiet now, but not empty. The piano remained, ready to speak again, to carry new stories, to touch new lives. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the music would never truly end.